Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness Podcast. I am your host, Jeff Black. I am joined by the rather lean looking Brandon DeCruz. Today is episode 121, Rapid Fat Loss, accelerating fat loss by using protein sparing modified fast days. Ding, 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 ding. We're gonna skip our last few days recap. Brandon and I blew a little bit of our personal time, just kind of catching up about what's been going on in each other's lives because we've just been very, very busy. With that being said, I want to remind everybody we do have the Joe Jeffrey seminar that is September 27th, 28th, 29th, Nashville, Tennessee. Tickets are $300. It is a steal. We have already sold a quarter of the tickets. They are already gone. So love to see you all there. If you guys are interested, it is in the link tree in on my personal IG page. I also believe Joe Jeffrey's got it up. I believe the the Physique Collective has having it up.
And we can easily add that into the actual podcast show notes. So guys, look for that below. We will add that to this week's podcast.
Yeah, B's been handling that and helping me out with some stuff since I just handle getting all this stuff kind of uploaded and make sure it's sorted. But with that being said, guys, would love to see you all, gals, love to see you all. This is going to be the only seminar I do for the year. I will not be doing a seminar next year in the spring. If I do anything, it will be working with J3U. I've been talking to John Jewett about doing something in the springtime at the gym. So with that being said, please come support what Brandon and I do, support our friends that we've learned a lot from. And they really have kind of doing some great things over in Britain. With that being said, let's get into this. Brandon, today we're going to talk about rapid fat loss. Now, let's put this in context. What do you mean by rapid fat loss? Because there's all sorts of fat loss that could take place.
Absolutely. So rapid fat loss is essentially the concept of being in more of an assertive deficit. And we're going to speak about rapid fat loss in context of utilizing different principles and different strategies that can accelerate fat loss without incurring a lot of the negative adaptations and a lot of the drawbacks of rapid fat loss. We would have to do an entire other podcast on the drawbacks of rapid fat loss all in and of itself if we were to do this for an extended period of time. And I am going to compare and contrast some of these strategies that have been utilized over the years, both in the literature and then also, say, like weight loss clinics, with some of the strategies that I've extrapolated from the data and have manipulated for the context of accelerating fat loss, but also preserving lean mass. Because I'm not here just to help clients lose weight. I'm here to make them a better, leaner, stronger version of themselves rather than a skinnier, smaller, scrawnier version of themselves. And that's what a lot of times happens with rapid fat loss. So really the reason why we're recording this episode is because a few weeks ago, I did a solo episode. Jeff was actually out. And so I did a solo episode on advanced dieting strategies. And within that podcast, I talked about rapid fat loss days, protein sparing modified fasts, undulating calorie cycles, and my push-pull advanced fat loss method, which I utilize with clients. And that was episode 119 of the show. So this is going to be episode 121. And so this will just be a few other ones back. So if you guys have yet to listen to that episode, that's episode 119, please, I encourage you to pause this one and go back and listen to that one, because that episode just went live last Thursday, so a few days ago, and I've already gotten feedback. And the reason I'm doing this specific podcast is because I was given feedback that you guys would want to hear more about the topics of rapid fat loss days as well as protein sparing modified fasts. So that is essentially a necessary listen to be able to understand what we'll be discussing in today's episode. And during that episode, I touched on the topic of rapid fat loss days and the concept of protein sparing modified fast, but had mentioned that this was a topic that would take an entire podcast in and of itself. So I wanted to really discuss this in greater detail, and that's what we're going to do on today's podcast. So the topic of rapid fat loss is something many are interested in, as almost everyone I've ever encountered, and Jeff, I'm sure you could elucidate this or you could reinforce this, almost everyone that we encounter, whether it's clients, whether it's friends, whether it's just peers in our, in our circumstances or in our environment, everyone wants to lose fat faster. However, rapid fat loss phases are not appropriate for most people, as most individuals cannot adhere to an aggressive deficit for an extended period of time, nor should they even try to. And often the irony of the situation is that many who are in the worst situation to chase rapid fat loss are those that want to do it most. So I think that this is an opportunity to educate you guys and really empower you through education to know when is this appropriate and when is it not. And so this is why I will personally use what I refer to as rapid fat loss days, which is my version of a protein sparing modified fast. with clients who are either starting to plateau from a weight loss perspective or essentially from a fat loss perspective, and who I need to work towards breaking that plateau and stall with by creating a greater net deficit. Or I use this with clients who are trying to achieve a greater rate of fat loss for a specific event or occasion that has a time, a time deadline essentially. So it is impending, it is coming up. We can't, essentially modify the date at which they have to be ready. So for instance, I've utilized this with a lot of clients that have had weddings coming up, anniversary trips, photo shoots coming up, things of that sort. So it's a very time specific goal, and sometimes life comes up, the client doesn't adhere to a program, or they're just really facing adaptations that it may be our first fat loss phase and they're just not responding as I would have anticipated, or just they're in a stressful position, so we're not seeing as much progress as we would have anticipated. And so this is where I utilize these strategies. However, unlike many rapid fat loss strategies, whose duration lasts between 4 weeks at a minimum, and in some of the studies that we're going to cover today, they last 6 months or more. I use these rapid fat loss days strategically, and I essentially add and titrate them in between 1 to 3 days per week, depending on the client that I'm working with. And it's important to note that even these rapid fat loss days aren't appropriate for everyone. So I don't want, I always get this feedback when I do these podcasts and I go in depth about especially things that I utilize within my own coaching practices. This is not for every client out there that I work with. If I have yet to use it with you, it's probably because you are not in the category of client that it's useful for or that it's applicable to. And I'm very intentional and direct when I'm utilizing certain strategies. I'm going to put your best, or I'm going to keep your best interest in mind. And so this is a strategy that I only use with specific clients and select clients who I know can adhere to a larger deficit over a short period of time, needed to reach their goal, and B, who are committed to the process of ongoing coaching together, so that I can transition them out of the fat loss phase appropriately with me there to keep them accountable on the back end. And the reason this is such a focus for me is because the diet recidivism and weight regain rates are very high in the general population, with an average of 80+% of all dieters who lose weight regaining all the weight they lost, which means that it's less than 20% of individuals who go on a diet who actually maintain a significant degree of weight loss, which generally is classified as 5% of body weight loss or more. So out of everyone that diets, and there's millions of people that diet per year, only about 20% of individuals can keep off 5% of the weight that they lost or more. And I've been using these rapid fat loss strategies with clients for years, and have found that this type of approach works best for the following types of individuals: those who are experienced dieters who have been through other fat loss phases and have experience with the process, those who have developed great dietary adherence skills, both when it comes to sticking to the fat loss phase setup and also post diet, those who have an impending goal and prefer to be in and out when it comes to losing fat prior to transitioning to their next goal, which could be something like a muscle building goal or a body recomp goal, and those who have had, who have a significant amount of body fat and weight to lose, and who may suffer from a lack of motivation to do so if done over a very long time period, which is where I'm looking to build momentum and leverage that momentum to help maintain motivation through the fat loss phase process. And really, what I've seen with that, just anecdotally through coaching experience, is that sometimes when I can get early wins for a client, they buy into the process more because we build momentum. That momentum builds motivation, and that builds buy-in, which helps with their adherence. And ultimately, they get better outcomes than if we went into like a slow and steady approach where we only add in one habit at a time. And some people have that approach. I just haven't seen it be very efficacious based on certain client populations. And what we really have to do is we should always remember that there are no absolutes in dieting where you always or never use a particular method or strategy, which is why I'm specifically making it clear that these rapid fat loss days approach isn't for everyone. And it's also not something I use with all clients I work with, even if their goal is losing body fat. The approach I take is always dependent on the specific client I'm working with and the situation they're in, as ultimately I'm focused on picking the right tool for the right job, then limiting myself to one singular approach. And ultimately, the best nutritional approach when it comes to attaining your fat loss goals is the one you can adhere to, whether that be a long and slow approach where you stick to a small or moderate deficit over a prolonged period of time, or a moderate deficit with larger deficit days interspersed to advance the process, which is how I approach the inclusion of rapid fat loss days, which I generally use on off training days. So this is just the setup to what we're going to discuss on today's podcast, and really how we're going to really take a different approach to rapid fat loss, where today I'm not going to be discussing a rapid fat loss phase. Essentially, I'm going to be discussing rapid fat loss strategies, which we can utilize throughout the course of a week or the course of a fat loss phase in and of itself.
All right, so let's get into this. What is a protein sparing modified fast?
Yes, sir. So a protein sparing modified fast, which for the rest of this podcast, I'm going to say PSMF. So if you guys hear that acronym, that is a protein sparing modified fast. And that is a rapid fat loss strategy, which uses a low calorie, protein centric diet to create a large deficit while also aiming to preserve muscle protein. Hence, the words protein sparing in the name, as this strategy was designed to spare muscle proteins, which include both lean body mass and muscle tissue. And the goal of a PSMF diet is to be able to maximize fat loss by creating a larger deficit while retaining your metabolically active muscle mass in the process. Now, it's also referred to as a modified fast. So we see that within the name, and a lot of people, they have a misconstrued, I guess, interpretation of what that means. And really, why this is referred to as a protein sparing modified fast is because a true protein sparing modified fast is a low calorie diet where you're eating such minimal amounts of carbs and fats that you're essentially avoiding them, aka fasting, from direct carb and fat sources within your diet. So it isn't a fast in the sense of how many people think about fasting in terms of going, say, a complete day without eating and just drinking liquids, or going long periods of time without calories, such as with the 16-8 intermittent fasting approach. But this is a fast from high calorie, hyperpalatable, carb and fat rich foods. And a true protein sparing modified fast in the literature is a very low calorie diet where you basically only consume lean protein sources and carbs are minimized between 20 to 30 grams per day, with dietary fat intake coming out to around 30 grams of fat per day or less. So essentially, you're just getting the trace fats from your protein sources. And a lot of the research that's been done on PSMF diets also use both liquid diets and or meal replacement powders, which are effective as it makes it easy for the research team to account for how many calories participants in their studies are consuming each day, and also doesn't require any meal prep. So it's convenient, but this full liquid diet approach isn't something I personally agree with, as it doesn't help you to develop good habits and behaviors around nutrition, nor does this type of liquid diet help to manage hunger and appetite, as well as if we were utilizing whole foods. So I don't, when I'm going to speak about the literature, but I don't see a lot of these strategies that they utilize as being realistic approach, especially to take with clients in the real world. As I want to be able to continue dialing in a lot of my clients, eating habits and behaviors, even during a dieting phase, so that we can continue cementing a solid foundation to build from once the diet is over and we go back to maintenance. Like if you were just essentially utilizing a liquid diet or just using meal replacement powders, when you exit out of that diet, you're not going to have like a foundation or a skeleton to your diet to add from. You're not going to be able to stay on many of these products. In research studies, these are done in metabolic wards. So they're providing these liquid diets, these meal replacement powders to these subjects and to these individuals. And I just don't find that to be an efficacious form. I know that there's many companies that have done this, like Slim Fast and things of that sort, but that has a very high recidivism rate. So this is why I'm going to be speaking about later on in the podcast the difference between my rapid fat loss days and then protein sparing modified fast, and why I take the approach that I take.
Okay, so then what is the benefits of PSMF? And can you go through like what a rapid fat loss day would look like?
Absolutely. So there are many benefits that we can get from using PSMF and rapid fat loss days, which I've seen in practice and also is reinforced by the research that we have on these approaches. So when it comes to the goal of losing a significant amount of body fat and getting substantially leaner, PSMFs and rapid fat loss days provide several benefits. So we're going to go through different categories of benefits essentially. Now, when it comes to fat loss benefits, these strategies help to create a larger deficit on off days. Now, I'm specifically going to speak about them in terms of off days because I utilize them with clients only on off days. So I only utilize the rapid fat loss days on off training days. And this allows off training days to be rapid fat loss days and to induce a greater net deficit across the week because on those off training days, we're utilizing a larger deficit, we're eating lower calories. And then across the week, if we look at our weekly calorie average, it's bringing down the average and essentially putting you in a larger net deficit, which can help accelerate fat loss progress as you're maintaining a larger weekly deficit, which really is what matters on paper. It's not about being in deficit one day. It's not about being in a deficit, on the weekends or just during the week. It's about what type of deficit or what size deficit are you in across the week. They can help you break through fat loss plateaus. They're easy to implement and simple in and of itself. So when we go through the structure, you guys will realize how easy they are. And then they're also highly motivating, as most tend to look better in days. So one thing I've noticed with so many clients that I've run this approach with is their physique tightens up within the first week or two of running this approach. And this has been really helpful for me with clients who tend to hold a lot of fluid, like they get a lot of fluid retention, or those who come to me in an inflamed state where they're holding water, they're really water retentive, and they look inflamed, puffy, things of that sort. And the reason for this is this strategy allows me to flush some of the fluid retention, the inflammation they're displaying on their physique, and allows us to get a more accurate representation of both their physique and then their current level of body composition and body fat, because we're essentially taking out a lot of the water that's clouding the visuals, but it's also clouding the scale. Then when it comes down to metabolic health benefits, both rapid fat loss days and Psmfs also improve your metabolic health. So losing body fat has a ton of benefits to our metabolic health markers. So with these approaches, I've seen clients have better insulin sensitivity and better carbohydrate tolerance, lower blood glucose levels and lower fasting insulin levels when we've run blood work, improved cholesterol markers, including a decrease in LDL cholesterol, which is generally seen as more harmful cholesterol, and then triglycerides, a decrease in inflammation and water retention, and then also decrease visceral adiposity, which helps to decrease insulin resistance and the risk of metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes. Then in research, we see that losing body fat and a significant amount of body fat at that, so 5% of body fat or body weight or more, has been shown to improve blood sugar levels, improve cholesterol levels, decrease blood pressure, decrease heart rate, and then also improve inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein. So essentially, by getting lean and being lean, it's protective to your health as it helps with preventing insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. It reduces inflammation, which has so many downstream negative consequences and effects on your physiology and your metabolic health. And then it also helps to correct hormonal imbalances, such as low testosterone and high estradiol, due to having excess fat mass. So when you guys have excess fat mass, this is especially prominent in men. You will see that it will predispose men towards having low testosterone. The reason for that is that testosterone, more of your testosterone is being converted into estradiol due to the fact that you have excess body fat and you have excess aromatase, which is the enzyme that converts testosterone into estradiol. So now it's skewing your hormone levels. And so by losing body fat, we can actually see improvements in your testosterone and free testosterone levels. Now, this also, when we look at this, these approaches provide the benefits of fasting without the drawbacks, as these approaches provide all the essential nutrients you need without excess energy. And also the fact that these strategies center around a high protein intake, they help to preserve muscle and metabolic rate, which complete fasting does not do. Now, onto the muscle mass benefits. Both protein-sparing modified fasts and my rapid fat loss days are designed to elicit the greatest amount of fat mass or fat loss without muscle loss, which not only helps you reveal a leaner muscular physique instead of just a skinnier, smaller version of yourself, but maintaining muscle is crucial for maintaining your metabolic rate, your levels of energy expenditure, and an often overlooked component is it helps with managing your appetite. And one concept I've spoken about at length in multiple episodes of our podcast over the years is the fact that losing muscle mass during a diet predisposes you towards experiencing hyperphagia, which is an extreme persistent hunger and drive to eat, which is due to the loss of fat-free mass, including muscle. And now the issue with experiencing this, it's not only uncomfortable, it's not only something that many people struggle with in terms of overeating as a result, but this hyperphagic response is what often leads to the body fat overshooting effect, which is where after a period of drastic weight loss, such as from crash dieting, you rapidly regain all the weight you lost and more, and you end up slingshotting up to a body fat percentage that is higher than the body fat level that you started your diet at. So now it's like adding insult to injury. You've not only regained all the fat mass that you lost, but you gained even more than you even started with. So you're in a worse position than you started, say, 16 weeks ago when you started the diet. And this is something that we've seen in many drastic weight loss studies, including the famous Minnesota semi-starvation study, an experiment which we've talked about many times. And in this landmark study, they found that their hyperphagia persisted until fat-free mass had been fully restored, suggesting non-adipostatic signals, aka non-body fat related signals, were also involved in the stimulation of both hunger and excess food intake. And what we saw in that study is that even after restoring their original level of fat mass, the men in this study didn't feel satiated due to not having restored their original level of fat-free mass that they started that study period off with. So they kept overeating and they kept feeling this persistent drive to eat, which it was, they essentially, if you look at it, it's like, the Minnesota semi-starvation experiment, if you actually look at the document, it's like 600 pages. If you actually go through like the case study examples where they actually interview these men, they basically were expressing the fact that they felt like they didn't have control over their hunger anymore. Like they were just eating in excess and they felt gluttonous, but they could not control their appetite to the point where they felt like they needed to continue eating. And it wasn't until they regained the fat-free mass that they lost that they were able to stop feeling that incessant drive to eat. However, by the time they were able to do that, by the time that they gained their fat-free mass, they were fatter than when they started the process to begin with. Now, we know that many people can lose weight, but very few keep it off. So to be able to put yourself in the best position to succeed long term, you need to make sure that you retain your muscle mass during a diet. And two of the most effective ways to do that are to engage in progressive resistance training and then also to eat a high protein diet, which will maximize muscle protein synthesis and minimize muscle protein breakdown. Now, a 2019 review on the influence of muscle mass on appetite regulation found that the drive to eat is increased when muscle is lost during intentional weight loss. The evidence suggests loss of both fat mass and skeletal muscle mass directly influence both the trajectory and magnitude of weight regain, which highlights their potential role in long-term appetite control. Now, another overlooked benefit of protein-sparing modified fast and rapid fat loss days is they manage appetite better than other low-calorie diets. So first and foremost, protein is the most satiating macronutrient, and vegetables are the most satiating foods gram for gram. So if we were to compare, calorie amounts and we looked at the energy density of foods, first of all, vegetables have very low energy density. They have high water content and they have high fiber content, which are all components that have been shown in the literature to increase satiety, increase fullness. So using a dietary approach like the rapid fat loss days that I construct, it's very heavy in protein and vegetable sources. And so you're getting low calories, you're getting lean sources of foods that are lower in calories. However, you're getting a lot of satiety. So we're minimizing calories, yet we're combining both of the food sources that help to keep you more satiated than other lower calorie, lower protein dietary approaches. Now, there's also research that finds that low calorie protein sparing modified fast are more satiating than higher calorie diets, despite the calories during the protein sparing modified fast being far lower. So, for example, in a 1987 study, researchers divided individuals with obesity into two different dietary conditions. Now, one group was put on just a 500 calorie protein sparing modified fast diet, while the other group was put on what they refer to as a balanced diet that contained 1,200 calories. So they had approximately one group that was 500 calories per day. The other group was on 1,200 calories per day. So if we look at the discrepancy, that's not only 700 calories difference, but that's about 2.5 times more food that the group that was in the quote unquote balanced diet was eating as compared to the protein sparing modified fast diet. However, during the first month, those in the protein sparing modified fast group consuming that just protein-based diet lost significantly more weight and reported significantly less hunger than the subjects consuming the 1,200 calorie diet. Similar results were obtained in the second month, but differences in hunger were not statistically significant. And there were no significant differences between conditions in the dieters' ratings of their preoccupation with eating or in the ratings of acceptability or the disruptiveness of the diets. So they essentially rated them to be the same in terms of their ability to adhere, the difficulty of the diet, the adherence issues, things of that sort. But they were eating far less food and they were still not seeing automatically many people think if we're eating lower calories, we're automatically going to be hungrier. But when we look at the protein sparing modified fast diet, because of how it's constructed, it is far more satiating than even just a balanced diet that's maybe higher carb or higher fat, but doesn't contain as much protein in it. And then there are other, some additional benefits I found from using protein or using rapid fat loss days with both my clients and myself, because this is a strategy that I've been using for myself since 2015. I initially utilized a rapid fat loss phase in 2015, and I got good results from it, but it was kind of brutal in terms of the length. I did it, I made many mistakes back then, and I actually utilized there was a book by Lyle McDonald, and I utilized his approach to this essentially this type of rapid fat loss goal. However, due to the length of it, I incurred a lot of not only metabolic adaptations, but there were a lot of negative downsides. So this is where I started titrating and really adjusting things and then looking into literature. And at this point, 9 years later, I've really constructed something that is a much more advanced as well as a much more optimized approach for the clientele that I work with personally. So first and foremost, some of the additional benefits that I've seen is that it shows you how easy it is to diet when you drop hyperpalatable foods. And really, when this comes down to it, like there's been so many times that I've been able to reset a client's palate by utilizing some of these rapid fat loss days because you don't have the budget for high carb and high fat foods on rapid fat loss days. And I find that many of my clients will report lower cravings and less susceptibility to want these foods on these days once we've integrated them into their diet and they've gotten used to them. It also shows you the importance of protein, as protein helps to build muscle and retain muscle during a deficit so we can prevent the loss of our metabolically active muscle tissue. Protein also helps to suppress hunger and manage appetite essentially, and it helps with blood sugar control as well. So this is a strategy that I found that many women have been surprised as to how satisfied they feel and how good they feel, especially they're not experiencing blood sugar swings or ravenous appetite. And a lot of times I have women come to me that have a very large history, or a very long history rather, of crash dieting approaches where they felt ravenous all day and they've kind of just white knuckled their way to fat loss, or essentially they've white knuckled their way to weight loss. Let me not say fat loss, because they've lost a ton of muscle in the process. So when I'm able to switch them to one of these strategies where I integrate, say, 1 to 3 days of these rapid fat loss days, we're prioritizing protein, veggies, micronutrients, things of that sort. They're not only surprised by how satiated they feel, but they also feel great from a biofeedback perspective, which is not something that they've been able to experience or they have experienced with prior approaches. This approach also helps to create what are referred to as bright line boundaries, because to be honest with you guys, I know that it's very popular to be screaming from the hilltops about if it fits your macros or flexible dieting, but there's a lot of people that they just don't do well with moderation as they're extremists, or they really find it hard to just have a little portion of something. Once, it's kind of like you rip off the Band-Aid. And once they have one cookie, it's like they need the platter. So sometimes we have to utilize strategies that really help to moderate someone's exposure, or to limit someone's exposure to some of these hyperpalatable foods. I've also found it to help shift eating patterns and behaviors, because we're reducing hyperpalatable foods and we're getting used to eating high satiety whole foods. And ultimately, this helps accelerate fat loss if someone has a deadline. And this acceleration is something I found to help clients, essentially increase their motivation, especially in those who have struggled to drop body fat in the past or who have been considered diet resistant. And we also see in the literature that losing weight quickly may also motivate participants to participate in their diet and persist with it, and ultimately get better results as a result of that, essentially the wins that they're seeing themselves. So it shows you that the body is resilient and will acclimate to eating less food and losing fat at a faster rate, especially if your protein intake is nailed, which is why this is the fundamental component of these rapid fat loss days and of these protein sparing modified fasts. And I also find this approach to teach individuals that you don't need to stuff yourself all the time. I think this is almost like a fallacy of not only our general population, but also fitness influencers and things. You have to eat 6 meals a day. You constantly have to be eating. You should eat immediately when you wake up and before you go to bed. It's like, you guys don't need to stuff yourself all day. You'll survive. Don't get me wrong. And I think it's really important to, especially from a dietary perspective, we live a soft life. Honestly, many of us, we have unlimited resources in terms of food, water. We are so blessed, and we have the opportunity, the choice to make to diet. And really what you guys need to do is, and I do this for myself, I need to push myself out of my comfort zone a lot of times. And it shows you, I found that this approach oftentimes, when I first introduce a client to it, they're like kind of hesitant. And then once they do it and they realize they can do it, it's like it teaches them that you can do hard things. And really why that's important, not only from the physical perspective, but we have to realize, and you guys need to realize that if you have large goals, you're gonna have to push yourself outside of your comfort zone, because if you're unhappy with where your physique is now, it's probably because you've been stuck in the same place that you feel comfortable with. And not only that, but physique transformation is all about both physical growth and fortitude, as well as mental growth and fortitude. So you need to be able to push your limits to really see where those boundaries are. And this is just a small type of step forward in that approach where you could teach yourself and show yourself, listen, I can do hard things. I could diet really hard 1 day a week. That's also why I don't like the whole process, like the Psmf diet, because this is months on end. And it's like the person doesn't see the finish line. When I add this into a client's routine and it's 1 day per week initially, it's like, dude, I can do this. I can go lower calorie for 1 day a week. It's not going to kill me. It kind of just reinforces their belief in themselves, as well as when they see the results, they buy into the process more, they're more adherent going forward, and they get better results.
Is there any research on protein sparing modified fast? They done anything on it? If so, like, what's your thoughts on the research?
Yeah, man. So honestly, there is a lot of research on this topic, and much of it centers around fat loss and metabolic health enhancing benefits. So that's really where we're going to focus on today, because that's also not only our listenership, but the client population that we work with. We work with either other fitness professionals, we work with people that are fitness enthusiasts, or we work with a lot of general population clients, people that are lifestyle. I work with Lifestyle Lisa and Gen Pop Gym. You work with a lot of clients in the gym from the general population. So they either have physique goals, or they have metabolic health goals. They want longevity. They want to have essentially look better, feel better, and function better. So the concept of a protein sparing modified fast was initially developed by Dr. George Blackburn, who was a professor of nutrition and associate director of the Division of Nutrition at Harvard Medical School. And in the early 1970s, Blackburn started using low-calorie diets consisting of just lean protein sources like chicken and lean, low-fat fish to help his patients lose a substantial amount of body fat, while also helping them to maintain muscle when they were suffering from either obesity or an acute illness. And in one of his initial studies using a Psmf diet, he helped patients lose over 48 pounds on average and noted that this approach minimized the loss of lean mass, which was something that was a big issue with other conventional dieting strategies at that time. And honestly, it's still an issue with a lot of your stock standard diet approaches and advice. As of the 2010s, the Cleveland Clinic has been researching the effects of protein sparing modified fast for individuals who have a body mass index, or aka BMI, of 30 or more, or a BMI of 27 or more, with one of other comorbidities. So that could be insulin resistance, that could be high blood pressure, or that could be type 2 diabetes. And their research has found that protein sparing modified fasts are beneficial for not only improving weight loss outcomes, but also for things like glycemic control, insulin resistance, cardiovascular risk factors, and then also very applicable and very, very beneficial for those suffering with insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. Now, one 2016 study put individuals who had failed conventional dieting methods on a protein sparing modified fast to see if these, quote unquote, diet resistant individuals would lose weight with this approach. And they tracked them over the course of 6 months and found at the 6 month point, they had lost an average of 25 pounds, which was approximately 10% of their body weight, which is a clinically significant amount of weight loss. And they also found improvements in their total cholesterol and their HDL levels as a result of that clinically significant weight loss. Another study took 680 obese individuals and put them on a protein sparing modified fast for an average of 17 weeks. And then what they did was they did a follow-up period of 9 weeks, which essentially was a maintenance period following the active dieting phase. And these individuals lost an average of 47 pounds during the 17 weeks utilizing this PSMF approach. And then they maintained an average of 41 out of those 47 pounds lost at the end of the maintenance period, which honestly, that's an impressive amount of weight loss maintenance. And so they also found that their diastolic and systolic blood pressure and serum triglycerides fell significantly for both the men and women in the study. And they also had some like predictors or markers of success within the weight loss study. And what they found was weight loss was most successful in those who adhered the longest to the PSMF and those who stayed the longest in the maintenance program. So those, we see the averages was 17 weeks on the weight loss diet and then 9 weeks on the maintenance program. But there were individuals that they gave them the option, would you like to stay on this program and work with a qualified professional for longer? And those were the most successful individuals. So it just shows you the, I guess, the influence of accountability. So overall, the literature finds protein sparing modified fasts to be very effective for the goal of significant weight loss and muscle retention when they're followed consistently.
Okay, so then what is the difference between a protein sparing modified fast and the rapid fat loss days? Like a couple points for people to really just take home and remember.
All right. So despite the fact that protein sparing modified fasts are very effective in research and also in practice, and they're the foundation that I built, my rapid fat loss days approach on, there are some drawbacks to this approach and to protein sparing modified fast, which is why I don't use the traditional or the true PSMF diet approach, nor do I use this as a long-term dietary intervention with clients that I would have them follow daily for months at a time. So first and foremost, a true PSMF diet is a very low calorie diet, which generally contains between 650 to 800 calories per day. And in research, these intakes are prescribed to clients, irregardless. So they're not looking at their body size, their preferences, or their dieting history. It's a stock standard amount. This is what they're utilizing for the patients. This is what the liquid diet contains or the meal replacement powder contains, and they just go with it. And as a coach who works with clients in the real world, I don't think that this, I essentially don't think this cookie cutter approach is going to align or even be applicable for most of the clients I work with. And honestly, it doesn't align with the client-centered and individualized approach I like to take to coaching. But I also believe that adherence would be a major bottleneck if I were to provide clients with a diet this low in calories, which isn't as much of an issue in research studies. And that's why we're not seeing them not getting good results, because if you really think about it, a lot of these participants are in the lab every single day and they're being watched and they're given their meals in liquid form or in meal replacement powders. So they don't have the option to eat more calories than they're being given, which isn't the case in the real world. So it's not like I can just send my clients exactly what I want them to eat every day and be like, you can only eat this. Now, another issue is that many of the protein sparing modified fasts that are used in research only include liquid nutrition or lean protein sources in their diets, which not only could lead a client to becoming micronutrient deficient, but also to experience more issues with hunger, which would threaten their ability to adhere to it. So the PSMF diets that have also been tested are generally lasting between 4 to 6 months, and they gradually reintroduce calories after that point. But this is an incredibly long period of time to be in that large of a deficit, especially as almost every PSMF diet that's been studied is containing less than 800 calories per day. So for all these reasons, and more, I prefer to use rapid fat loss days rather than the true PSMF diet. And the biggest difference between a traditional PSMF and how I set up and build out my clients' rapid fat loss days is the construction of the diet, the food sources used, and also the duration that I use this strategy for. So, first and foremost, my rapid fat loss days are different from an energy intake perspective, as the calorie intake I set for my clients on these days are completely dependent on them as a genetically unique individual. So, when I use this approach, I'm considering the client's current level of body fat percentage, their physique goals, their dieting history, their dieting preferences, their ability to adhere to a diet, and all the data that I've collected on this client. And I'm taking that into consideration. And I also design these diets using mostly whole foods so that this individual is getting an adequate array of micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, polyphenols, and fiber in addition to the protein sources. I do this because I really want to keep them more satiated, which makes it easier for them to adhere to. And I do this by adding in a wide array of micronutrient rich vegetable sources. In addition to that, I also make sure that we're supplementing essential fatty acids from fish oil or omega-3 supplementation to ensure they're hitting their essential fatty acid requirements. And then another aspect that I'm dialing in specifically based on the client that I'm working with, but with many of the clients that I work with, is I'm making sure that they get in sufficient electrolytes so they feel better during those rapid fat loss days. Because one of the number one pieces of feedback or negative markers that we see in a lot of the PSMF research is lack of energy, fatigue, headaches, brain fog, things of that sort. And a lot of that's from a loss of electrolytes. And so I try to make up for that by ensuring that that is dialed in within my client's program. Now, my goal with how I set these rapid fat loss days up is to get the few essential nutrients that we need from our diet, which are essential amino acids from whole food proteins, which are needed to preserve muscle mass and metabolism. I want essential fatty acids from fish oil or omega-3 supplementation, which are needed for health purposes as well as for the absorption of fat soluble vitamins, and vitamins and minerals from micronutrient dense vegetable sources, which help run many of our metabolic and enzymatic processes. I also take a different approach to how long I use this approach with clients as compared to the traditional PSMF diet. So, on average, I will use this with a client between 1 to 3 days per week. And at most, I've used this 4 times per week with a client that has either excess adiposity, like they have a very high BMI, they're in the clinically obese category, or in, different stages of that, different classes of obesity, or if someone has an event that's quickly coming up, such as a photo shoot or a wedding, and it's like something that we really need to dial things in to make sure that they're ready on that specific date. And that's an entirely different duration than traditional, PSMF diet approaches where they use this for months on end. And keep in mind, yes, you're able to get results, but a lot of people in the real world, if you think about yourself, are you going to diet on 650 to 800 calories every single day for the next 6 months? Most people aren't. So it's just not realistic to even consider that an option. Now, overall, I found my rapid fat loss approach to not only preserve muscle mass and training performance better than a traditional PSMF diet, which I've utilized. So I've run the PSMF diet. So I know personally how it feels and the decrements and biofeedback and training performance and lethargia and things of that sort. So that's also a reason why I don't use the traditional PSMF, because I've experimented on myself. And I'm someone that I will not ask a client to do something that I have yet to do, I have not done, or I wouldn't be willing to do. And the thing is, I have done the PSMF diet and it's brutal. So I don't believe that it's efficacious to ask a client to run that specific diet. And so what I've really found with my approach is that it's not only more sustainable and easier to adhere to, but it makes it so that they're able to stay consistent with it, which is really the name of the game when it comes to coaching clients to get into the best shape of their lives. If someone can only adhere to a strategy like a PSMF 1 day a week for one time ever, it's not useful. We need a tool that's the right tool for the right job for the right client, and that they're able to use consistently to create that larger net deficit, which is really the goal of accelerating fat loss utilizing this approach. So that's why I've opened up and I've really, I guess, expanded upon the fact that yes, PSMF has some incredible research. It's a great strategy, but I do feel that there are some modifications that needed to be made. And that's why I modified and made adjustments. And keep in mind, this is my experience having coached over 1,000 clients. Your mileage may vary both as you as a client or you as a coach, but I'm just sharing my experience and my anecdote, having worked with so many individuals and utilizing this strategy both myself and then with other clients over the last 9 years.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing that, man. I've actually utilized that before. It was big on the boards shit in the early 2000, what, eights, nines,
Yeah,
10, and all that. And it works, but you're right. If you're not really prepared or don't kind of understand what you're really trying to do behind it, it's just it has a lot of downfalls. So I really appreciate you taking the time to put together that podcast episode for us all. Where can everybody find you at?
absolutely. So you guys can find me if you need anything coaching related, consultation related. Please feel free to reach out to me at my most available resource, which is my email, which is bdecruzfitness@gmail.com. And then also be sure to follow me on Instagram at @BrandonDeCruz_. Please remember to continue following the show on Spotify and iTunes. Continue giving us 5-star reviews. Right now, I think we're up to 74 reviews at a 4.9 average. So keep bumping those fives up so we can get back to 5, because we were at 5 until like review 50. And then also be sure to tag myself and Jeff on your stories, and just share the show and really give us feedback. Because the reason I did this podcast was because in episode 119, I asked for you guys, did you want me to do a rapid fat loss podcast in and of itself? I had covered that strategy. It was one of 3 strategies that I covered on episode 119. I received 5 or 6 DMs. And also, I want to give a shout out to the individuals I met in Pittsburgh this past weekend at the Masters Nationals. There was multiple people that came up to me and asked me if I was Brandon from Chasing Clarity. They really loved the show. So there's a shout out to both, you and myself, Jeff, for putting this together over the last 2 years or 2.5 years. I really appreciate having the opportunity to meet you guys in person and just to hear about the fact that you guys have really benefited from the education and the information that we've put out over the last 2.5 years. So, guys, you guys can find me at those resources. Jeff, tell them where they can find you at, my man.
Yeah, if you guys are looking for me, Jeff Unbreakable Black on Instagram, and website jeffunbreakableblack.com. If you're looking to pick up a copy of my book, want to chat with me about, whatever, let me know. Otherwise, dude, thanks so much for putting this together. And ladies and gentlemen, like, share, get us out there. We appreciate it. Take care.
Peace.